Hi, my name is Rich Schmidt. I'm here with Brianne Day. We're at Day Wines in Dundee. That's December 11th, 2019. Thank you so much for joining us today, Brianne. Really appreciate this.
Yeah, thank you for interviewing me.
Absolutely. So let's start with the most important question, which is why wine?
It's funny because Eric texted me that. He's like, that's going to be your first question. It's like, I know this. It's fine. From a pretty young age there, I had a very magnetic pull to wine and to viticulture. My family is from the Pacific Northwest. I grew up in Western Washington, and my folks moved to this area when I was 16. They moved to Tigard, and I had my first car and no friends, and I would go out driving and explore, either trying to get lost in Portland or turn the other way and try to get lost out here in wine country. And it was very like exotic and glamorous to me to see something that I associated with books that I read about, Europe. Like I was kind of into on a American classics kick for my late teenage years. So I was reading a lot of Hemingway and Steinbeck and Fitzgerald and stuff, and all those people are always traveling places where there's wine, and it was very different from the suburban upbringing that I had been raised with. When I had just turned 19, I traveled for the first time internationally and went to Italy. And I was raised very religiously, and I was invited to go preach to English-speaking people in Italy. And really, I just wanted any excuse to go, and that was the excuse that I used, and which afforded me funding from my parents to go. I was there for 6 weeks, and I did the preaching thing for about 20 minutes when I got to Milan, and then pretty much was immediately distracted by everything that was Italy, which included food and art and history and wine and guys and all of it. And so I was in northern Italy on Lake Como, and was tasting in a wine shop, and the guy that owned the wine shop said that we could open any bottles that we wanted, and I was trying to not be greedy, so I was like, well, what's that and what's that? And he would tell me these stories about where these wines came from, and it was all these northern Italian things, and they were obviously, I had no frame of reference. I had heard of like Chardonnay and Cabernet, and I barely knew that one was white and one was red. Like it was pretty much no frame of reference. But he was saying these things that were completely foreign to me, and then saying like, oh, it only grows in this village. They only make it here. And I thought that was really fascinating. Like in the whole world, that grape only grows in that village. And now that I am more experienced in the industry, I realize that there are grape varieties in Italy that they only call it that in that city, and that it does exist in another place. But anyhow, it was really fascinating to me. The thing that really was fascinating to me was, as I was traveling on that trip, and every town I went to, I would try to find a local wine shop or something and ask them, what's the thing that is only from here? And what I liked about it was that there was this means of cultural expression that they found through a tangible thing that other people could also experience. That this idea was immediately, not lost on me, that it was like, I could take these bottles home, and I'm actually literally taking a piece of that place home with me, and I get to experience that thing with me wherever I am. And that was really, it was just very attractive to me. It was very interesting to me, being a, suburban American that didn't have that, and the restaurants you see in your town are Applebee's and Outback and stuff. So that stuck with me for a long time, and I didn't really know what to do with that information, or didn't think there was anything to do with it. I didn't imagine that I was going to be involved in the wine industry. Yeah, so I didn't imagine that I was going to actually have any outlet for that interest, but it stuck with me, and so did this really insatiable kind of wanderlust feeling. And in my early 20s, I began saving. I got married really young. I got married not long after that trip, and my ex-husband was also very young, and both of us hadn't gone to college yet, and so I was kind of able to find jobs that paid the bills okay. He went back to school to become an engineer and was in school for 6 years, and while he was in school, I was saving really, really hard to travel. And by the time he graduated, we had saved a lot more money than I anticipated, and I knew that I had this interest in wine. I had been working some like events and things at a couple of different wineries out here, and wanted to investigate why I had this draw to it. So we left and traveled around the world for what ended up being almost 2 years to wine producing regions, and really dove in deep on that. We had this goal of tasting 1,000 wines, and we had a blog for it, and so we documented everything that we tasted and a lot of information about what we were learning. And through the course of it, I mean, we probably tasted 1,500 or something like that, and documented them. And it was really apparent early on in the travels that certain kinds of wines were more appealing to me, and that certain phrases kept coming up that the wines that were made in certain ways or grown in certain ways were the wines that kept standing out as being just the wines that spoke to me. We started in New Zealand and went around New Zealand and Australia first, and then Southeast Asia, and then most of Western Europe, a tiny bit of Eastern Europe, and then South America. And early on, the first area in New Zealand, the wineries that were growing grapes organically or biodynamically, and that were using native yeasts, those were kind of the two big things that were the wines that spoke to me, that would give me like a visceral experience with them.
So you mentioned like the visceral experience of these certain kinds of wines.
Yes, where I actually would feel like, and I still get this with some wines, like your nervous system is acknowledging something about them that is interesting, that fires it up. Both through smelling and through tasting the wine, it would fire up my nervous system in other ways, like tingly feelings on my scalp, or things like that, where you actually feel like you're physically feeling something. And I noticed that every time I had that experience, it was after somebody had said something about it being, we do biodynamic farming. I'm like, what the hell is biodynamic farming? I don't know what that means. So I was really kind of keyed into those kinds of wines. And France, thank you. France happened about 7 or 8 months into the journey, and I was in Paris before heading out to travel around France, and met a guy who was a wine shop owner who specialized in what we now know as natural wines. They weren't really using that phrase at the time, but that's what they would be considered now. And he gave me a book about all the natural wines of France. It was in French, but I followed it around, and he also wrote down other producers that weren't included in the books that he knew personally, who he felt I should talk to. And so we made a point of actually visiting all of those producers, and that really kind of solidified, like, okay, this is what I want to do. After talking with vineyard managers and somms and winemakers and all these people associated in the industry, I recognized that winemaking was the thing that was the most appealing to me. And I knew that I wanted to do it in that manner, through fruit that was grown organically or biodynamically, and through minimal intervention. And so I came home well, my ex-husband and I were traveling together. We broke up in Peru. Then we went to Costa Rica together anyway, and we're still friends. We somehow got divorced right. But we went to Costa Rica for 6 weeks, and we're not we're getting divorced when we go home. We knew that, but wanted to kind of redefine our friendship and our relationship. So we came home, and I was basically a single person for the first time in my adult life, because I had gotten together with him when I was 19, and wanted to be a winemaker. So I felt very a lot of sense of purpose, and I felt like I had a lot of direction, but I also had an incredible amount of freedom that I hadn't experienced ever, and it was flipping awesome. It was great. It was great. So I came home at the beginning of 2008, started classes at Chemeketa, and I was so fired up about practicing what I had been learning and everything, that I was like, I need to work a harvest. So I found a winery in New Zealand that needed an intern, and it happened to be a place that I had stopped by when I was there, and so I was familiar with it. It was in Martinborough, and they offered me a job, so went down to Martinborough and did my first harvest, and lived in New Zealand for about 3 months. And right before I left for New Zealand, I went to Michael Alberti's shop and met him, and totally recognized that he was somebody who knew everything there was to know about the Oregon wine industry, and aligned myself with him and kept in touch with him. I got his newsletters, and in one of his newsletters he mentioned that his assistant Pearl was leaving, and so I sent him an email and said, sounds like you need a new assistant. And he was like, yeah, when are you back? And Michael gave me a job. I called it, I was not that helpful to Michael. Michael was far more helpful to me than I was to him. I was at his shop, Friday nights, and assisted him with the in-store tasting that he did on Friday nights. But I just...
it's all good.
I just asked him, a lot of questions, got a lot of direction from him, met a lot of people in the industry through him, and was able to connect with people that were doing things here in the way that I wanted to learn how to do it. So the first people that I connected with was Brooks, and I met Chris at a tasting that he was pouring at Pasta Works in Portland, and chatted with him about volunteering basically, and ended up working for them after I got back from New Zealand over the course of the summer, and did vineyard work for them and helped remodel. That was when they were up in the space that John Groshaw's now in, and Vincent, and so helped him remodel the tasting room over the course of the summer, and do other things like that, and then worked harvest for them. And doing 2 harvests in 1 year was obvious to me as a way of really intensifying my experience, and so I started doing that almost entirely every year. That first year after I worked harvest at Brooks, that was the year that David Lett died, and there was a memorial service for him in McMinnville, and I didn't know him, I'd never met him, but I felt like if I wanted to be a part of this industry, that it would be respectful to go to his memorial service. So I met Jason there, and Jason called me up like 2 months later, or later, a month and a half later after that, and said, asked me if I wanted to work for him. And I was kind of like speechless and beside myself, and was like, sure, anything you want me to do. And they wanted me to manage their tasting room. And I was like, well, I want to do production, but this is a foot in the door at, the original Willamette Valley Winery, so I'm going to take it. And I thought that perhaps that would lead to some sort of dabbling in production, which it did not, because Jason is extremely specific about how he runs his operation, and I get it now. At the time I was like, come on man, let me top a barrel or something, but he had crew to do that, and he needed me to do the job that he hired me for, and it was good. I mean, I didn't know I was going to own a tasting room in the future, so it was good to have that experience. Frankie, don't eat the blanket. I worked for Irie all of 2009, and then I did Harvest also in 2009 at Willackenzie. And then I left to go travel in Central America, and while I was working at Irie, some folks had come in and mentioned that their son was making wine in Argentina, and I was like, that's awesome, I love Argentina, I was there, I want to go back, and so they put me in touch with him, so I was able to get a job down in Mendoza, and I lived in Argentina for 3 months, and that was in 2010, and then that's a wine pumper. While I was down there, I was thinking about, I always anticipated that I was going to have my own label and my own brand, and was trying to think about other aspects of the industry where I had gaps in my education and needed to know things like how to sell wine, how to market it, how to brand it. And so I started thinking about working in restaurants as a means of polling customers on a regular basis and seeing why people made the decisions that they made to buy wine. So while I was in Argentina, I sent out some emails to some Portland restaurants that I thought had wine programs that I liked, and mostly that were very specifically regional. And I got an email back from Andy Fortgang with Le Pigeon, and he invited me to come in for an interview. My email was kind of ridiculous. It was like, because I'd never worked in a restaurant before, and so it was like, hey, I'm looking for a summer job, a temporary summer job. What do you think? You know, it was like, I was ridiculous. Fine dining is actually a career. I didn't really get that. I was just like, waiting tables, I've eaten in restaurants, I can do this. It's no big deal.
How hard could it be?
How hard could it be? Okay, honey. But Andy happened to have an employee who had to go out on medical leave, and he wanted to hold her job open for her. And he also is a giant wine nerd, and I had no idea. I'd never met the guy. I'd never heard of the guy, so I didn't know. But he asked me in for an interview on the second day I got back from Argentina, and he said, "Why do you want to make the leap from working back of house to working front of house, or from wine production to front of house?" And I said, it was kind of tongue-in-cheek, because whether or not I believe in God, the jury's still out on this, but I said, I believe wine is God's gift to humans, and I want to make it accessible to people. And he said, okay, so we're going to give you a try. There's a really steep learning curve, but I'm going to show you how to do. So I started working at Le Pigeon. Over that summer, at the end of the 3 months, it was temporary. I had a job lined up to work at Scott Paul, so I worked Harvest there. After that Harvest, Andy opened Little Bird, and so I started working at Little Bird, and also concurrently with all of that, I'm still working at Storyteller. I was taking classes at Chemeketa, so anytime that I wasn't out of the country doing a harvest, it was a couple of jobs and school. I worked at Little Bird. I left. I quit that restaurant so many times and got hired back so many times, but I quit in late summer of 2011 and went and worked Harvest in Burgundy. I was in Volnay for Domaine Hubert Verdereau, and was able to work Harvest in Burgundy and Oregon that year, because 11 was a late year in Oregon and an early year in Burgundy. So I came home from that experience, which was a freaking amazing experience. And had about 2 weeks off, and then started Harvest at Bellepont, which was also an amazing experience. It was like I had two of my favorite Harvest experiences in the same year. It was super cool. That was in 2011, and I was still working at Little Bird. I took another full-time job managing a wine program at another restaurant called Riffle in the Pearl District. And I started working for John Groshaw. and just kind of assisting him in the cellar. And then I ended up, working harvest for him. And in 2012, I bought my first fruit, which was 2 tons of Pinot Noir from Silver Shot Vineyard in the Yola Amity Hills. And that wine was in barrel, and I was waiting tables one night at Riffle and waited on some folks that just this nice group of older people, and one of the guys asked me about my grape tattoo. I have a big grape tattoo on my arm, so I basically told him through the course of their dinner about my experiences leading up to that point, which is what I just told you guys, although it was probably faster and with less interruptions. But he started asking me more and more questions that got... so through the course of their dinner, his questions became more business focused, and I had spent the last 6 months writing a very, very detailed business plan and a 10-year projected budget, and was kind of waiting for somebody to ask me some questions like that. And so had answers for him, and at the end of his dinner, he kind of leaned back and goes, "I'm gonna be your backer." And a lot of thoughts went through my head at that moment. Most of them were skeptical. Most of them were like, this guy's had a couple bottles of wine, he's feeling generous, take this with a grain of salt, he has no idea what he's getting into or how expensive it is. Like, I've had other people, when I was waiting on them, be like, oh, we're gonna support you, we're gonna buy, cases of your wine, we'll be in your wine, and it never materialized into anything. So I was just like, okay, cool, thanks, yep, you're gonna be my backer, sure, I
got it made.
But their friends that they were with kind of took me aside and said, you should really pay attention when this guy says something, he means it. He's not gonna throw that around, and they can do it. So, and I was like, oh, okay, cool. So I made an appointment with him to meet later in the week and present my business plan to them. And I think it was 2 or 3 days later, and I thought about, do I try to not scare them off and just try to get funding for the 2013 vintage, which would be sweet, or do I swing for the fences and give them this full business plan that I have developed and see what happens, And the more I thought about it, I was like, if this scares them off, if I go big and it scares them off, they're probably not the right people, and I can afford the I was literally working 4 jobs. I was like, I can afford the 2013 vintage. I can make that happen. But if I go big and they say yes, my whole life is going to be completely different, just on a totally different trajectory, So I did. I just gave them the really big version of the plan, which included a building about this big. I think I specifically said about 15,000 square feet in my business plan, and wanted to have it be a shared space, and other things that were in the business plan that I haven't yet had the time to make happen, but I have the means to now. I have the space to do things that I've been wanting to do, just haven't had the opportunity yet. But they were like, yeah, that's cool, let's do it. And so they helped back the 2013 vintage, which I made about 450 cases in, and then I was able to get some really good distribution in place pretty early on in Chicago and New York, and feeling pretty solid in those 2 markets gave me the push to grow more significantly in 2014. Plus there was a glut of fruit, and I could get a lot of stuff for cheap in 2014, and so it just seemed like a good year to make a leap. So I jumped up from 450 cases to about 3,000 cases in 2014, and had to find a lot more markets to sell in, and so grew my out-of-state distribution pretty significantly that year. And then Richard said, okay, you grew the brand, now it's time to find a building. And I was like, oh, he was serious about that too. Okay then, let's do this. And so we started looking. I anticipated that I was going to be doing this project in Portland in an urban wine setting. I live in Portland still. But as I started looking around the city of Portland, pricing was pretty prohibitive on buildings, and pricing on development within the city of Portland is nuts. It's $50,000 to hook into the sewer and water. It was ridiculous. So I started looking out here in this area and found this building, which was a vitamin production facility. And I thought, well, it's in the heart of wine country. It's right on 99. This could really make sense. I knew that I was going to be doing something a little bit different in terms of the wines that I was making, and I thought having something to be a counterpoint in the heart of wine country could be really interesting for people, especially consumers. So we got this building and closed on it July 15th, 2015, and remodeled the production area and got my federal permit in time to bring fruit in by the end of August.
Wow.
6 weeks later.
Wow.
And that over there it was just a warehouse. It was just like a concrete slab warehouse. So we tore out the floors, put in floor drains, put in 3-phase power. So I made 4,500 cases that year, with a lot more than I was prepared to. I had a part-time assistant, of course during harvest he was full-time, and I had an intern, Ross Malouf, who now has his own label and has been making wine here also ever since. Hey, stop it. And I had 7 winery clients here also. And it was I won't say shit show. It worked. Everything went fine. Like, we have lots of space, so that helps. I think if we had less space, it could have felt a lot more chaotic than it did. It worked, but in retrospect, it's so much more dialed in now that I look back on it like, wow, that was nuts. After harvest wrapped up in 2015, we started remodeling the rest of the building later on in the winter, which involved tearing out a lot of rooms over in the barrel room and completely gutting this portion of the building, which was previously these like horrible little moldy smelling offices. So we just completely gutted all of that, and we worked with a really cool architectural firm in Portland called Fieldwork Design, and Yamhill County is tremendously easy to work with, especially in comparison to City of Portland. But we had some grandfathered permissions because this building has been here so long. It was an auction house originally, and then was a vitamin place, and so it's been around. I think this building's been around since like the 50s. Okay. So we had some grandfathered permissions, and if we changed the footprint of the building, those permissions would go away, and we'd have to reapply for non-conditional or non-conforming use, those kinds of things. So we didn't change the footprint of the building at all, and that's one reason why we have so much outside space, patio space, for the tasting room as opposed to indoor space, which to me the real selling season in Oregon is May through September, and that's usually pretty decent weather anyway, so that's fine, you know. Anyhow, so we started working on that. I expanded to about 15 out-of-state markets and was doing all of my out-of-state sales, and right after harvest in 2016, I discovered I was pregnant. That was basically right around this time of year, in 2016. And how much do I want on record? That was the filter just going up. I broke up with Vigo's dad right after I found out I was pregnant, so I went through the whole thing as a single person, which is was great. It was way easier than it would have been if I had been in the relationship. We got the tasting room finished in about April, I think, of that year, and oh my goodness! And so I opened the tasting room when I was like 6 or 7 months pregnant. Hired my first full-time employee, Nate Wall, who now is the winemaker down at Troon, and had Vigo August 11th, 2017, and then started harvest 4 weeks later. That was nuts. It was crazy, and it's felt like a blur ever since. But got through the 2017 harvest, hired a full-time direct-to-consumer salesperson. So now I have 2 full-time salespeople or employees, and 1 part-time who's kind of full-time also, who's working in the tasting room. So 3 employees now, and we're in 20 out-of-state markets and 3 other countries. And Vigo came with me to 10 states last year, and this is what we're doing. So that about brings you up to speed, I think.
That is an incredible story.
Hey, thanks. We're making about 6,000 cases now. Work with, I counted them up this year, 17 vineyards, 17 grape varieties, and 17 wines. I don't know how that happened. It was coincidence, but that's what happened this year.
So let's talk about that before we do anything else. I'm curious, obviously you talked about being a counterpoint to the rest of wine country, and you had this idea of different than your neighbors. So tell me, why all the varieties? Why all the different types of wines?
Yep, it's kind of there's multiple reasons for that. The travel definitely had a big reason for that, because I got exposed to so many different varieties and fell in love with so many different varieties through the course of traveling, and recognized similarities in a lot of places around the earth to different areas of Oregon. Oregon is a big place. We have about half the total landmass that France has, and you think about how many varieties of grapes are grown in France. It would be silly to think only 2 or 3 varieties could do well in Oregon when we are bigger than most European countries. You know what I mean? Like we have the ability. When I worked in the restaurants, I think I found. So when I worked in the restaurants, thanks, honey. I found that there are a lot of different varieties that pair really well with food, and I always really wanted high-end restaurants to be my bread and butter in terms of who I sell to. Not owning my own vineyards gives me this really cool freedom and versatility to make changes very quickly, and to change to the market very quickly. So when I'm doing out-of-state sales and I see what things my customers are putting on their wine programs, it's like, well, they're making Chenin Blanc, they're putting Chenin Blanc all over their wine program from the Loire. Why can't we grow Chenin Blanc in the Northwest? We probably can, and there are very small examples of Chenin Blanc being grown in the Northwest. But it's, that applies to so many different varieties of grapes, and the purpose that they serve in wine programs and restaurants, and not having vineyards makes me extremely versatile and to quickly be able to respond to the needs of the market. We made a wine this year because my distributor in New York asked, could you make, because I make these kind of more entry-level price point red and white called Vin de Rouge and Vin de Blanc, and my New York distributor specifically requested, could you make an orange wine at that price point? And I was thinking about fruit sources that I work with and what could be interesting, and was like, yeah, sure, I can do that. And 6 months later I can be like, here it is in bottle, there you go. Like it's a pretty sweet ability to, it's not something that wineries typically can do, responding really fast like that, because normally you have to plant your fruit You get to see after 3 years if it's going to produce something usable, and then make it, then try to get it out into the market. It's a whole,
Sure.
different thing.
Sure. Do you have a favorite to work with, a favorite region, a favorite varietal? Is it purely responding to market, or do you have something that you really want to bring forward?
I mean, it's not, none of it is purely responding to market. When I started the project, I thought I would only be making Pinot Noir. What I like about Pinot is that it is such a clear and transparent conduit of place. And being from the Pacific Northwest, and really that initial thing that spoke to me when I was in Italy about wine, about it being a expression, a cultural expression, I wanted to do something that felt like a cultural expression of this place that I grew up in. I find that working through different grape varieties allows for a different conversation and different types of expression of a place. I don't feel that all of Oregon can be summed up through Pinot Noir and Pinot Gris. I think that there is a huge amount of diversity in the state in terms of geographical diversity, in terms of political diversity, maybe not so much racial diversity, but whatever. That will come with time, I hope. But I want to show a lot of different faces of Oregon through my wines, and having all this different grape material to work with is it's a really fun way to do it.
So I'm curious, I want to go back a little bit to your first harvest, 2008? Is that what I wrote down? 2008, I had a lot of notes here. Tell me about, you'd spent this time traveling, you tasted all this wine, you'd been a consumer, you had a knowledge. Tell me about your first time on the production side, and what made you want to continue.
It was the hardest thing I had ever done. My first harvest was the hardest harvest out of all of them. New Zealand doesn't have quite so much of the OSHA guidelines in place, and it was ridiculous, some of the things that I did. We didn't have I'm really sorry about my dog, I'm sorry. We didn't have a forklift with a bin dumper, for example, so loading the press was all done by hand, and I was the bottom man on that totem pole, so I had to be the person that loaded like all the FYBs into the press overhand like this. We made a lot of Sauv Blanc there, so it was crazy. It was physically very, very demanding, but also really, really rewarding. I like to be physical. I like to be outside and do sports, and I liked how much working in that way appealed to so many different parts of my personality. It was scientific, it was artistic, it was sensory based. I felt like every single part of my body was being used in some way, and was fired up, and it was really, really stimulating. It's exhausting, and at the end of harvest, when everything in your body is fired up into an intense level for a period of time, you get to the end of that period of time, and it's exhaustion like I've never experienced before also, but it just was kind of addicting. It just became kind of addicting to have that experience and to feel so much. You know what I mean?
So you mentioned this a little bit when you're talking about Oregon and all it has to offer, and your idea of this kind of the kind of cultural experience and cultural expression. No. But tell me how that kind of developed to like your winemaking philosophy. How would you describe your winemaking philosophy and how it's developed over the years?
Well, my winemaking philosophy initially, you're gonna hate it as soon as you get in it. You're gonna ask me to get you out. You always do. It was all about purity, and it is all about purity, but that was the wanting to make something that was an expression of a place was really what drove me initially, and trying to determine ways of making wine that enabled that and created that. So really wanting to make wines that were a piece of a place, that were a time capsule of a time and a vintage, was what I was going for initially, and what I still strive for. When I started, I felt like a little bit more dogmatic about the natural wine approach. I'm more dogmatic about farming than I am about ppms of SO2 at this point. I think that there's something to be said for responding individually to the needs of each wine, and each fruit and each vintage, and certainly through the course of what I've been doing, I have seen 4 or 5 fairly drama-free and easy harvests, and this year was something different from that, and it challenges the idea that you can be dogmatic about any approach when different vineyards and different situations come up.
So tell me about that, kind of the development of that, where you kind of think you're going to be dogmatic a certain way, and then you have to kind of learn how to respond. Was it a kind of a gradual process where you're like, well, okay, I'll just try this, or I'll try this? Or
I still am fairly, by all intents and purposes, would be considered a natural wine producer. We're not using really much of anything in the wines. But I also don't want to look around and judge what other people are doing or the decisions that they make. I recognize that running a business is complicated and personal and stressful, and however people need to do that to make their wines how it suits them is what they need to do. So I guess I do have some personal things about how I make my wine and things that I won't do, but I don't think that dogma needs to be, I don't need to, it doesn't matter. It's not important in the grand scheme of things, you know what I mean? It's like...
Talk a little bit about some of the vineyards you work with. You talk about being more dogmatic about grapes and growing practices. So what do you look for with your grapes and your vineyards?
To put it into, one classification, I look for organic or biodynamic farming, and I would say 85-90% of the vineyards that I work with are farmed organically or biodynamically. But as an absolute minimum, glyphosate free. Mm-hmm. And when I first started out, I didn't really feel like I had the ability to make requests of growers that they, do anything special for me, because I felt like I was such small potatoes that I didn't have the ability to make requests. And I also am aware that I'm not a farmer, and that my growers know more about farming than I do, and so I felt kind of deferential to them to be like, well, you know your site, you know what you think needs to be done here. I'm gonna defer, because I don't know, I just felt like it would be kind of crazy for me to come in and be like new to the industry, not a farmer, and to be like, okay, farmer man, you've been farming this site for 30 years, but I'm going to tell you what I think you should be doing and what's best. And I just wasn't respectful. So I listened a lot more when I was starting off, and talked to my growers about why they were doing what they were doing, and eventually felt like I was experienced enough and a big enough purchaser that I could make some requests about some things, because there are some things that farmers do too because they've always done it and that's what's worked for them, and they don't feel like making changes, and nobody asked them to do anything different. But more and more, there are more of us in the industry that are purchasing fruit who are making similar requests, and so going to a grower and saying, could you please stop using glyphosate, isn't the big deal request that it used to be. They're getting more and more farmers are used to getting asked those things, and there are more products available on the market that are either not glyphosate free, considered organic certified herbicides, or there's other methods of controlling weeds. That don't involve herbicides at all, and that's really kind of the best goal. I've had growers tell me that they could do that. I have one grower up in Chehalem Mountain that I buy quite a bit of fruit from, and she just planted an acre of gamay for me also. And she said, I would like to switch to organic, but it's going to make your prices go up a little bit. Can you do that? And I'm like, I got to put my money where my mouth is. I can't just ask the farmers to absorb all of that when I know that their margins are slim also. So if it means that much to me, I got to put my money where my mouth is, and the buyers got to put their money where their mouth is too. If they value natural wines, if they value farming that's better for the planet and everything, it's a trickle down. Everybody has to do it. Everybody's got to kind of pick up a little bit. It can't be just the winery or just the farmer. It has to be everybody. So, if my bottles have to cost $2 more, like, big deal. So.
You mentioned gamay there. Are there other varietals you're looking forward to working with
Yes.
coming on the horizon?
I have to follow up on one of these for Southern Oregon, but right now I have aligote, gamay, and zabibo, all in the ground specifically for us.
Oh wow, that's cool.
And we have some Neradavla that's going to be going in the ground also.
So some pretty interesting stuff there.
Yep.
Why? What about those made you want to plant them? Made you want to make them?
The French grape experiment in Oregon is happening and is going really well. There's been very little experimentation with Italian varieties, so I have a lot of curiosity about Italian varieties, especially in Southern Oregon. So the Zabibo is in the Applegate Valley, and the Neradavla is going in the Applegate Valley. I think Southern Oregon is a even more untapped resource than the Willamette Valley, and we don't know what we can do. We don't know what's going to be the champion grape of Southern Oregon, if there is one. Rhone varieties seem to do really well down there, but maybe there's other things. Maybe Sicilian varieties will do really well. We don't know. So that's what we're trying to find out.
So in addition to all the different varietals and all the different types of wine you're making, you also have all these interesting names and labels you've come up with for all your different wines. Tell me about that process and the design and naming of your various labels.
Sure. Most of my wines are single vineyard wines. Making a time capsule of a time and place is still a goal for every single wine that I make. Sweetie, I want you to stop it.
No.
I want you to stop. So the majority of a lot of my labels have this like tree thing with a different sky in the background, or you can kind of see a little tree right here. This is a thing that we do, and those are ones that we do on all of our single vineyard wines, and they're named very straightforwardly: Belpont Vineyard Chardonnay, Mays Vineyard, Applegate Valley. Those are a little bit more straightforward. The tree thing and stuff was because I wanted to make wines that are an expression of the Pacific Northwest, and I want that to be obvious from the outset. This is no judgment on anybody else in the world, but there are a lot of wineries that like to pattern after very classic French style things, and we are not France. I am like kind of outspokenly proud of being an American winery and being specifically an Oregon winery. All of our fruit comes from Oregon. I probably will never buy from Washington. I'd be more likely to buy from like the Sierras if I was going to go anywhere else. But it's we're an American winery and an Oregon winery, and I will never say that my wines are Burgundian. They are not from Burgundy, so that's impossible. So it's I want the labeling and the advertising to be very reminiscent of that. Mm-hmm. For the wines that I make that are more esoteric or that are more style, like style driven, mm-hmm. I've gotten a little bit more creative with some of the names. I feel like I make wines either in a very classic way or in a very creative way. Those are kind of the two sides that I like to play. There are names like Hawk and Deuce and Running Bear. Those are both nicknames for my backers. Apparently his college nickname was Hawk, and she was 22 when they met, so he used to call her Double Deuce, and then it just got shortened to Deuce, although she claims it's because she's his second wife that she's Deuce. But in any case, that's a nod to them and a thank you to them. Running Bear is also another one to Richard, which was, I think he was a frat boy. He's got all these, like, he's from the Midwest, they're from Michigan, they use all these like nicknames, Running Bear and stuff. So anyhow, for his 75th birthday, that was the first vintage I made of that wine, and so I named it for him as like a birthday present. Broken Destimmer from Johann Vineyards, that was because the destimmer broke the day that fruit came in, and its whole cluster, mm-hmm. and
by necessity.
It's fairly straightforward. What are other ones? Petite Doré Adoré, that's one named for Vigo. That's mm-hmm. the first one I've released named for him, so it means little golden adored one. Mm-hmm. Normally I won't name my wines French words, but I liked that it rhymed. I liked the Doré Adoré thing. I thought it was kind of cute. Queen D is named for my sister, and I tried to make that wine for her palate. She likes Vendée Blanc better, but whatever. TNT is Altenat, and the picking bins all say TNT on them whenever they come up, and it stuck. It was like, oh, that makes sense. So there's a variety of reasons for the different names. I think Tears of Vulcan, which is not up here because it's sold out, is probably my, and Mamacita are two of my more, you can't really figure out why those two are called what they're called. And they're also two of my more creative wines that I definitely was born out of a creative thing. Mamacita was named by my iPhone because it was made out of Malvasia, and I was texting a bunch about the Malvasia fruit, and my phone kept correcting it to Mamacita every time, so that stuck. Awesome. And that became Mamacita. Tears of Vulcan is a wine that I was drinking a lot of textural, aromatic, skin contact white wines from Sicily the first year I made that wine, and was trying to find fruit in Oregon that I could do something similar with, mm-hmm. and found a vineyard called Le Beau Vineyard up in Chehalis Mountain that's growing Viognier and Pinot Gris, and I thought, well, skin contact Viognier could be really interesting. Let's see what this is like. I've never had that. So that first year was a total experiment. It's co-fermented Viognier and Pinot Gris, and then I get Muscat from a neighboring site that I blend into it. And I was thinking about what, if anything, do Oregon and Sicily have in common, and the only thing I could come up with was volcanic soils. And so I named it as a homage to the god of volcanoes, but also because one of the first orange wines I had ever had was called Pheasant's Tears from Georgia, mm-hmm. and so the tears part was kind of a little nod to Pheasant's Tears, and that's how that all came about. So,
like you say, it uses all of the parts of your brain and body when you're naming wines.
Yeah, when I'm naming anybody, that's Vigo's name was a similar process. So apparently that's just how I work.
You talked a little bit about day camp here and your initial you setting it up as a kind of a co-op space and having other winemakers here. So tell me about, you mentioned it being rough at first and having gotten smoother. Tell me about the kind of process of having other people under your roof and being that kind of cooperative space.
Sure. Everybody that's moved in, for the most part, has been kind of a similar mindset in terms of how they make wine. So people have approached me in maybe one or two situations. I went to people and was like, hey, I've got space, I'd love to have you in the building, that kind of thing. But for the most part, people have come to me because they need space and because they are aware of how I make wine and want to be around people that do things in a similar way. It's logistically can be challenging depending on the personalities that are in the building, and also depending on the quantity that people are making. Anytime somebody is bringing in larger quantities, they inherently are going to have more of an impact on the flow of operations during harvest. And for the most part, it's been pretty smooth. There's just been a couple of things where you have to try to work through either practices in the winery or philosophical differences or things like that. So it's been an opportunity to get to know a lot of my colleagues and people that are at similar phases in their business development and understand what they're doing and why they're doing, and it made me feel it makes me feel more connected to the industry in that way. I think without that, it would be easy to get very wrapped up in your own project and not be, especially like I'm kind of a more introverted person when I'm not on the road doing sales and like putting on that face. I'm a lot more of a homebody and stuff, and I think it would be a stretch for me to be reaching out to other people and finding out what they're doing. So I appreciate that I've had that opportunity to.
You've been labeled a winemaker to watch recently. You've been getting a lot of good publicity lately. Tell me about.
Oh, I dropped a mic.
That's okay.
There it is.
Tell me about your kind of new exposure and new notoriety in the wine world and how that's affecting you.
Well, I think that something broke. I'm sorry. It's a little loose, but okay. I have been pretty fortunate in terms of organically getting press. I don't have a publicist or anybody that works for me that goes out looking for that stuff. So when it happens, it's a surprise and helpful. It's exceedingly helpful for sales. I don't know where my sales would be without some of the press, but it's been happening since almost my first vintage, you know. I think one of the first things that kind of popped up was I showed my wine, my very first vintage, at Roth Fair in London, and I got included in Isabel's book. And after that, it was like I was just a more common name in that circle of the wine industry, and so it's been happening kind of consistently throughout the short period of time that I've had a winery, the last 7 years, and I didn't know that that's what the San Francisco Chronicle was interviewing me for. They didn't tell me that. Esther came by at the beginning of harvest and chatted, and I had met her before, so I just figured she was in the area and wanted to see what was up, that kind of thing. So that was a surprise to me when that happened. But yeah, I feel very thankful and surprised and mostly grateful when it happens, you know, and why Eric Asimov would come here and taste through my wines with me and chat with me. Like, that's amazing to me. That's amazing to me, you know. I think being connected close to somebody like Michael Alberti, who now obviously writes for the Oregonian, although Michael has been extremely professional about not letting friendships dictate what he writes and stuff like that. But working for him, I met Jancis Robinson through him. I met Stephen Spurrier. I met a lot of like the old school mainstay people. I've become close to Elaine Brown, and it's, you know, it's just, I don't know. I don't know, but I feel very lucky about it, you know. If they find what we're doing to be interesting enough to write about, I'm thankful that that's the case, because it really, really helps with sales. It really, really does.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, where do you see yourself and Day Wines heading in the future? What do you see as you look, say, 10 years down the road for yourself and your brand?
Hopefully Jackson family will approach me and try to offer me a lot of money for my brand, and I will take it and go move to southern France.
Go live on the beach.
But if that doesn't happen, then I see us topping out around like 10,000 cases. I don't really want to get bigger than that. The more you make, the more you have to sell, and the more employees you have to hire. And I think it could get very complicated. And I don't want my life to be any more complicated than it is. So I think 10,000 is about where we could top out with having a small crew and still being able to do that. The idea of having my own vineyard has definitely been occurring to me more and more, especially since I became a mom. Prior to becoming a mom, I think because I valued my freedom so much, I didn't want to be tied down by a vineyard, but now I have no freedom, so I might as well get a vineyard. It's kind of like why I got a dog. It was like, well, we can't do anything anyway, so might as well get a dog. But also having the ability to have a piece of land that is mine, that I'm growing things that I can't get anybody else to grow for me, and that I can give to my son if he wants it, is definitely really appealing. So that idea has been present in my mind quite a lot. In terms of which wines I make and what I'm going to continue to make, and I can't really exactly predict that, because the market dictates some of that. My own kind of whim dictates some of that, and I can't really predict what that's going to be. But I know that there's going to always be some level of experimentation and new things, and trying things out that, you know, I know that's always going to be a part of the brand.
Does it add any pressure to you, feeling like you've gotten this kind of notoriety as an experimental, as a natural winemaker? Do you feel like you have to keep pushing, or do you feel like at some point you'll be able to just sort of do what you want to do and not worry about?
But I am doing what I want to do. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like the experimenting and stuff is purely what I want to do. It's great that people appreciate that, and that's what I'm becoming known for, but that's all completely genuine and what so no, I hope I never stop doing that, but that's more because that's the thing that is driving me, you know, than driving the brand. I think I drive the brand, you know what I mean? I don't really see that changing. I get the biggest kick out of the wines that are the new wines, those are the barrels that I visit the most in the barrel room. Like, well, what is this? I don't know what this is. Like, what's it going to be? You know, the idea of discovery is way more interesting to me than predictability.
What about as you look at the Oregon wine industry and what you've seen change since you become a part of it, and kind of what you see as you look ahead for it?
It's changed quite dramatically in the 10 years that I've been a part of it. Or I didn't know about things that I know about now. You know what I mean? I mean, there are vineyards that I'm sourcing from that are 25 years old that are growing Viognier and Syrah in the Willamette Valley, or that are growing, there's vineyards that are 45 years old in the Applegate Valley where I'm getting Tannat from. So people have been experimenting longer than when I was aware of it. But it does feel like when I started 10 years ago, Pinot Noir was in a different place than it is now. It's still the bread and butter of Oregon, and it's my bread and butter too, really. But it's changed in the marketplace, and people are buying wine. Younger people are buying wine differently than their parents did, and my brand seems to appeal to the millennial kind of crowd. I think price point dictates that. I think wanting something new dictates that. So I think as the generationally things are shifting and changing, it's affecting all kinds of commerce, and wine is a part of that. So if maybe that the past 10 years, that shift away from things that are tried and true and tested and point driven, and I feel like my parents and their generation buy things based on safety and security, and like, this is going to be good, I know what it's going to be, it's going to, there's 95 points on it, I'm going to like it. And I feel like my generation and younger than me are buying based more on their own, hopefully on their own experiences. I do think that that's a very idealistic way of putting it, because I do think that the younger generation is also susceptible to marketing and to wanting to be cool and those kinds of things. But there does seem to be more of a thirst, literally and figuratively, for new, for what's new, what's different, what's untested, and that's affecting this industry. And I don't think I don't think all of Oregon is going to shift to meet those needs, because I don't think that the millennial wine drinkers can support all of the wine industry. I think there's a portion of us that are going to be, selling to those people. And maybe that portion will continue to grow a little bit, especially as that generation grows up and starts getting better jobs and spending more money. But it's just changing. It's just shifting ideas. I'm a person who is I think I'm good at networking and at finding out about things and jumping on it and making decisions like, yeah, I'm going to take that fruit. Yeah, I want all of it. I don't want anybody else to have that fruit, and kind of doing that. And there are other people like Chad Stock, who is going out and making his own experiments and planting his own fruit. And there's something to be said for that. That's very, I respect that a lot. And more and more, hopefully, there are people like in our little subset of the industry that are going to be putting down their own roots and not just shopping for fruit like we have been.
So if someone came to you today and said they wanted to join the Oregon wine industry, what would your words of wisdom for them be?
I've had people say that. I've had interns say that, and I always ask them what their values are, because determining your place within the wine industry is, I think, taking the time to really figure that out is going to be the difference between being successful and not, and being happy or not. There was Ross had a guy working for him this year named Brandon, who's worked a couple of harvests now in production, and he said that this year was the last year that he was going to be doing production, and he was like, this isn't the part of the industry that's for me. He's like, I love selling wine to people, I love introducing things and educating people about wine, but this part of the industry is not the part of it for me. And I appreciate that he is self-aware enough to take that away from his experience with production. I think there's a lot of reasons why people find their way within the industry, but if you really take your time and investigate it and figure out your place within it, it's all valid. You know, if you're a somm, that's valid. If you're a server, that's valid. If you're a cellar rat, that's valid. It's all valid. It just depends on what people like. And will you stop it? Will you stop it? Sit down. You know, their success is going to depend on finding what fits for them.
So that actually is all the questions that I have for you.
Okay,
is
cool.
there anything I didn't ask that I should have asked? Anything we didn't cover that we should have covered here today?
Well, I'm actually pleasantly surprised, and maybe I shouldn't even bring it up, but that you didn't ask about what's it like to be a woman in the wine industry, because that's what everybody wants to talk about right now.
So that used to be kind of a staple of these interviews, and then there are enough women in wine now that we don't feel the need to ask it as much.
Right.
If it comes up, it comes up, but
I don't know, because I've never been a man in the wine industry, so I don't know what it's like to be a woman. It just is. Yeah, it just is. And I just know that I don't want to be called a woman winemaker, because I don't think that has anything to do with it for me. So just a winemaker's fine.
Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough.
Just like I'm not going around calling anybody else a male winemaker.
Male winemaker, yeah, that's kind of weird.
Yep.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, for navigating the obstacles to
yeah, and I apologize for my children.
It's all good. Our video editor's gonna have a blast with this one. So thank you so much. We appreciate your time and your stories today.
Yeah, thank you for coming out here to chat with me.
Thank you. We'll go ahead and let you off the hook.
Okay, thank you.